Have you ever wondered what goes through the mind of a condemned man in the last moments of his life? She asked to die that way. The voice was so low it sounded like a whisper passing through the cold walls of death row. It was 5:42 a.m. The harsh white light reflected off the icy tiles. The silence was brutal, and then that sentence, "Stay with me until the end." Because what you're about to discover now might surprise you. The prisoner closed his eyes for a second, as if gathering courage. His hand trembled. The confession cut through the air. A mystery enveloped every word. Dark criminology met criminal psychology in a single instant. The moment became a record. The moment became an enigma. The handcuffs glinted under the execution room's spotlight. Each metallic click sounded like a clock ticking, marking the end. But before the final step, he left that vague, terrifying statement. Like that, why use two words for a final fate? Why trade the coldness of justice for the mystery of an omen? Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when you heard someone say something that resonates in your head? That's exactly how the guards described the moment. An intense cold, as if death row had swallowed all hope. No one knew if it was a request, an order, or just a sick delusion. What you're about to discover may rewrite your idea of guilt and redemption. The psychologist in charge of the case noted in his report, the sentence displays calculated ambiguity. There are signs of manipulation. He shifted responsibility. He placed the desire to die on the victim's lips. Authority based on years of study, but doubt continued to linger. Was that confession a form of reverse psychology? A final blow to collective perception. Stay with me until the end, and prepare to deal with your own discomfort. The photograph shows his eyes closed, but reports indicate that, just before speaking, he looked away from the wall. He seemed to see something no one else could see, a fragment of memory, or perhaps a silent outrage. An unsolved mystery. The atmosphere grew thick. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the muffled sound of footsteps in the hallway. Each step a reminder that death was there, close breathing. And he calmly uttered the sentence that ignited the investigation. She asked to die like that. Have you ever encountered something that defies logic? That turns every explanation into more questions? This is the heart of the solved mysteries, which hold an even greater secret. The human mind in the abyss. Now, imagine this entire scenario as a shadow play. Criminal psychology collides with pain. Curiosity mixes with controversy. Every detail whispers a clue that challenges the official truth. And you're about to follow every single one. What did he mean by that way? Will we find some hidden request in the victim's story? Or was it all just a final strategy to manipulate consciences? Death row is ready to reveal its deepest echo. Confession has become an enigma. And from this point on, the dark road unfolds in layers of pain and mystery. The next step is a delve into the truth hidden behind every word. Are you ready? The entire city was shaken with shock when, one autumn in 1998, her body was found on the banks of the river that runs through the old quarter. It was a moonless dawn, the air thick with the smell of rain and dried paint. Just hours earlier, neighbors had heard muffled screams echoing through the narrow cobblestone alleys. By the time the sirens arrived, it was all part of a macabre ritual no one ever wanted to witness again. The victim was only 27 years old. Her name was Marina, a dedicated teacher with a gentle smile, known for bringing literature books to reading sessions in nursing homes. But that night, Marina became a living message, carved in red letters on her body. Each letter scratched into her skin summed up a fragment of pain that demanded to be read. In the center of her chest, the word truth insisted on leaping out, like a silent scream. On her forearm, guilt dripped in thin streams, staining the floor with tortuous memories. The knots that bound her resembled ceremonial ropes, too tight for ordinary human hands to undo. Her hands were tied behind her, her legs crossed in perfect submission. Whoever orchestrated this horrific scene didn't just want to take Marina's life. They wanted to create an enigma, a journey of fear that would ripple through the veins of the entire city, and they succeeded. Yellowed photographs captured the horror and were scattered across the local press like shrapnel of indignation. The investigator in charge of the case, a man with a sharp mind and a history marked by sensitive investigations, described the scene as a transformation of public space into an altar of violence. He felt the impact the ritualistic form suggested. Ancient, almost mystical rites. There was a pattern, a choreography of suffering that surpassed ordinary brutality. Each fragment of Marina's body seemed to tell a chapter of an unfinished story, a hidden truth that began to emerge in the contradictory testimonies. That same morning, the first versions of the killer's existence emerged. Anonymous voices spoke of delusions of liberation, as if he believed he was on a mission of purification. The messages on the wall of the victim's house, scrawled in shaky letters, insisted on conspiracy theories involving secret societies and doctrines of atonement. Each version added a layer of mystery, multiplying questions rather than resolving them. The community trembled at the possibility of something far greater than a common crime. Meanwhile, experts in dark criminology began to dissect the details of the notes. Some concluded that the killer had recreated symbolism of ancient sacrifices, harking back to rites of passage where pain was a currency for redemption. Others saw it as a game of psychological manipulation, a final blow to capture everyone's attention and infect the collective mind with dread. The hidden truth seemed to slip through the cracks of logic, inviting each person to decide for themselves which narrative to follow. In the autopsy room, the smell of formaldehyde mingled with the metallic taste of dried blood. Technicians noted every cut, every rope mark, leaving perverse engravings on Marina's skin. Toxicological analysis revealed no evidence of poison, nothing more than physical trauma. It was as if the heart of the crime lay in the written messages, not the method of execution. A sense of helplessness overwhelmed the team. There wasn't just a corpse, but a puzzle that defied any easy solution. The impact reverberated in the tabloid press, which published gruesome details and inflammatory speculation. Headlines screamed ritual crime and deadly enigma, but only increased the pain of those still seeking justice. Amidst conflicting versions, what remained was a trail of unlikely theories, each more disturbing than the last. Outrage grew stronger. How could someone toy with another's life like this, transforming death into a spectacle of thought-provoking horror? Amidst all this, Marina's sister Marion became an active voice in the search for the truth. In emotional testimonies, she spoke of a deep connection she had with her sister, of dreams in which Marina asked for help. This human dimension brought a new perspective. Perhaps the words engraved on the body were not just a sign of guilt or atonement, but a final plea from someone yearning for liberation. The journey of investigation also became a journey into each of our inner selves, confronting our own sensitivity to cruelty. His name was Daniel Kruger, 39 years old, head librarian at a technical school in the city center. A soft-spoken man with an erect posture and old-fashioned glasses. Known for organizing book fairs, a frequenter of cafes that played jazz, a quiet neighbor who kept the same schedule, the same rituals. Nothing about him, at first glance, suggested chaos. No police record, no complaints, no behavior that raised any alarm bells. But that's precisely where the mask begins to slip in the stillness, where the silence screams loudest. Daniel was located 2 days after Marina's body was found. He didn't run. He didn't hide anything. He didn't cover his tracks. When the police knocked on the door of his small apartment on the second floor of an old building, he simply opened it, offered them coffee, and pointed to the bookshelf. Everything you need is here. His naturalness bordered on delirium. There was no hesitation in his gestures, no hint of guilt in his tone, but there was something, a vacancy in his gaze, a subtle pause between sentences, as if every word that came out of his mouth was being carefully sifted for effect. During the initial interrogation, Daniel didn't deny having known Marina. He said he admired her, that they shared a love of Russian authors, and that they sometimes met at the old public library building, where they both participated in a now-defunct book club. According to him, there was a silent connection between them, an affinity that went beyond words. But when asked about the night of the crime, he looked away. He mentioned a last conversation that had allegedly taken place days earlier. Marina, according to his version, was in an emotional collapse. She spoke of pain, of past losses, of not fitting in. And then he uttered the sentence that froze the room. She asked to die like that. This statement, dropped like that, almost casually, fell like a bombshell. The agent stopped writing. The forensic psychologist in charge of the wiretap exchanged a quick glance with the prosecutor. For the first time, the case had taken a turn. Based on narrative rather than concrete evidence. The question now was different. How far can a mind with a moral perception disorder influence? And more importantly, how can one distinguish confession from manipulation when the author so masters the language of doubt? Daniel's mind began to be investigated by experts specializing in functional psychopathy. The suspicion was clear. He might not be a classic monster, the kind who kills on impulse, but rather someone who acts at deep levels of rationalization. The kind who constructs his own moral structure, where victims are reinterpreted as participants in a redemptive journey. This theory found support in a series of texts he kept on his computer. Long, pseudonymous essays where he dissected emotional fragility as an invitation to eternal silence. Disturbing texts, written in the first person, laden with metaphors, like cutting off the inner light and the final dance of oblivion. The most disturbing thing is that, within that personal literary universe, Marina appeared under a different name. But her physical descriptions, biographical details, and even exact words recorded in reading sessions were there, fragmented, distorted, reassembled. She became a character, an object, an idea, and brutally she ceased to be real. Experts called this poetic dehumanization, an unconscious attempt to make the unacceptable acceptable. And in a way, this mindset revealed what was perhaps the essence of the crime, not death, but the transformation of the victim into a symbol. Behind the scenes of the case, investigators began mapping all the works Daniel obsessively read. Among them were authors like Yukio Mishima, Emil Chorin, and Sylvia Plath, all with powerful passages about voluntary death, nihilism, and the weight of existence. He didn't read just for pleasure. He studied pain like someone preparing a play. This preparation reinforced the thesis that the crime was meticulously rehearsed. Not only the act itself, but especially the speech that would follow. The phrase that would become an enigma. Gradually, society began to divide. Some saw Daniel as a cold manipulator, a predator disguised as an intellectual. Others, more influenced by his calm demeanor and almost hypnotic reasoning, began to question whether there wasn't, in fact, a distorted relationship where both shared a deep pain. The controversy grew when excerpts of a letter allegedly written by Marina were released. In it, phrases like, "Sometimes I just want to stop existing. He understands me in a way no one else does," fueled Daniel's narrative. But doubt lingered. Was this letter real? Or was it another ruse constructed after the crime? The document bore no signature, no date. The handwriting was blurred. And even as experts analyzed graphic patterns, the atmosphere of uncertainty grew. The impact was visceral. The line between reality and fiction seemed increasingly blurred, like a painting being washed away by the rain. The court was now not just judging a murder. It was judging an idea, the possibility that two troubled souls might have intertwined in a silent pact of self-destruction. During the hearings, Daniel maintained the same tone. Calm, lucid, almost resigned. His arguments were clinical. He didn't try to convince. He simply explained. He spoke of decisions, of how each of our actions can take us to places we never imagined. He repeated, in a low voice, "She asked to die that way. I just obeyed." For some, it was a strategy. For others, a revelation. For all, it was discomfort. Criminal psychology would call this instrumental consciousness, when the subject understands the impact of what they did, but doesn't see it as a crime, but rather as the inevitable consequence of an internal logic. The courtroom, even surrounded by rigid laws and structures, became a theater of emotional nuances that no one could control. Each session revealed a new detail, a contradiction, a memory that seemed to have been manipulated, reframed, or simply created out of thin air. Daniel, sitting with his hands clasped on his knees, spoke as if reciting an ancient tragedy. He looked the judge in the eye, but it was as if he were addressing something greater, perhaps his own past. In one of the trial's most disconcerting moments, he said, "Her pain pierced me. I was only the instrument." It's in these kinds of stories that the line between victim and perpetrator begins to blur. And when the truth seems to fit no explanation, when each answer raises even more questions, it's because we're faced with something that goes beyond the crime. We're faced with human complexity, with the shadows the mind is capable of hiding until the last moment. It's in these cases that criminal psychology ceases to be a theory and becomes an uncomfortable mirror. If you've made it this far, it's because you feel the same weight I did when diving into this case. And if these stories move you the way they do me, I want to tell you something. Being here, following along, makes a difference. It truly does. Because every time you subscribe to the channel, you help this content reach more people who also need to hear these hidden truths. People who seek to understand what no one explains, who feel the same drive to see this story through to the end. A story that seems to have no end. And more than that, when you sign up, you show that this kind of storytelling matters. That it's worth telling the stories that have been forgotten, that still echo behind the scenes of silence. And I promise, there's much more to come. Even more disturbing cases, life-changing decisions, revelations that still linger in the shadows. And I want you to be here with me every step of the way. So if this resonates with you, sign up. Not out of obligation, but because, deep down, you're already a part of it. Now, let's continue. Because Daniel's mind still hides things no one has been able to explain, and his next words have not yet been spoken. The interrogation room was bathed in a cold bluish light, as if time had stopped inside. Daniel remained motionless. Not a tremor in his hands, only the metallic sound of his breathing, rhythmic, as if he controlled each heartbeat to avoid showing weakness. The recorder rotated slowly on the table, while the detective's eyes searched for any crack in that unshakable facade. And then it came, the sentence, spoken in a thin voice, between long pauses that seemed to echo within the walls of the police station. She asked ... to die like that. There were no tears. There was no regret, not even a defense. Just that sentence, loose, raw, an invisible knife stuck in the center of the investigation. She asked, what did she ask? To die how? Why? These were questions that, in another context, would be absurd ... But there, faced with that gaze that seemed devoid of soul, everything assumed a distorted logic. As if Daniel's mind operated under its own rules, where guilt, desire, and truth were jumbled until they became unrecognizable. Body language experts were intrigued. The sentence was delivered without facial tension, without pupil dilation, or a change in tone of voice. As if you were merely describing a technical detail, a casual gesture of someone who accidentally pressed the wrong button. But what was most disturbing was the use of the word asked, as if Marina had made the decision, as if the victim role had been reversed in some narrative known only to him. The psychological game began there. Daniel didn't deny it. But he didn't explain it either. He didn't complete it. He left gaps. Intentional voids which each listener felt forced to fill with their own imagination. A kind of silent, cold manipulation that created moral labyrinths. And the more the investigators tried to pressure him, the more he retreated into his own universe. I only did what she wanted, he repeated. You don't understand the kind of pain it was. These words began to affect everyone, including the team of forensic psychiatrists called in to assess his sanity. During interviews, Daniel described recurring dreams. Visions of Marina whispering indecipherable words, begging to be freed. He said he could hear her pain, as if it were a constant noise inside his skull. He asserted that the request for death came not in direct words, but in gestures, looks, and deep silences. That death was a form of liberation, of transformation. The psychiatric court, however, revealed something even more disturbing. Daniel showed no classic signs of psychosis. There were no schizophrenic delusions, no complete break with reality. What was there was something more refined and more dangerous. A dark personality disorder, with traces of malignant narcissism and disguised sadism. He believed deeply that he had done the right thing, that his act was a kind of cure, that he was the only one capable of understanding what Marina needed, even if it meant erasing her existence. This complex mental structure baffled even experts. This wasn't an impulsive killer. This wasn't a serial killer driven by pattern. This was someone who had constructed a narrative so intimate, so well rehearsed, that he believed in it with unshakable conviction. And when confronted, he always responded with questions. Have you never loved someone enough to do the unthinkable? Have you never felt you could save someone from their own pain? Have you never heard a plea that wasn't expressed in words, but was there, in their eyes? The impact of these sessions was so strong that one of the psychiatrists left the case. He said he began dreaming about Marina every night, repeating the phrase, I asked to die ... but not like this. This detail was never officially confirmed, but it leaked and spread. Like everything else in this case, behind the scenes in court, Daniel was called the Silent One, because even when he spoke, what he said confused more than it explained. Each sentence left ambiguous traces. One moment he said he wanted peace. The next, that Marina was too much light for this world. The next, that he simply wanted to see how far someone could endure living with so much pain. It was as if he were toying with the limits of empathy, as if stretching the concept of love until it broke. And as insane as it may seem, some began to question, what if it were true? What if she really had asked? What if he understood something no one else did? These dangerous questions began to appear online, on forums, in criminology debates. Public opinion was divided between those who saw a cold monster and those who saw a man carrying a burden no one wanted to bear. The hidden truth at this point was clear. Daniel had constructed not just a crime, but a story. And stories, as we know, shape decisions. They influence perceptions. They become legacies. That's why understanding his mind required more than diagnosis. It required confronting the very limits of human judgment. Because, in a way, everyone there, investigators, jurors, spectators, was being tested. What do you see when you look at a killer? Monstrosity? Madness? Or just an uncomfortable reflection of what lies dormant within us all? Because there's something he kept hidden until the very last moment. A revelation only revealed minutes before the execution. A detail that could change everything you believe about this case. Stay with me until the end. Because what you're about to hear now isn't just the end of a story, it's the beginning of something you may never forget. In the white, windowless corridor where Daniel spent his final days, the walls echoed nothing, as if even sound was afraid to remain there. No tears, no pleas for forgiveness, only the rhythmic sound of time passing, and the silent anticipation of a truth that might never come. The that phrase kept reverberating in the investigators' minds. She asked to die like that. Now, what everyone wanted to understand was this delusion? Or a strategy? For weeks, forensic psychiatrists, criminologists, and language and behavioral experts came and went from cell 14B, all with the same question: did Daniel believe what he was saying? Or was he just pretending to believe it? The difference between true psychosis and sophisticated manipulation is subtle, sometimes impossible to detect. And this turned the case into a clinical obsession. It was like staring at a painting that changes every time you blink. In the first official report, the terms were cautious: individual with marked traits of narcissistic personality disorder, lack of genuine remorse, and possible cognitive distortion of effective reality. In direct translation, he was cold, self-centered, and used pain as a tool, but without being technically insane. He was like an emotional architect. He calculated every word, every silence, every expression. But something about this diagnosis seemed incomplete. One of the psychiatrists, Dr. Alvaro Quintana, requested additional sessions. He sensed something lurking beneath the obvious layers of behavior. Daniel never got angry, but he also never showed curiosity. It was as if he were always 3 steps ahead. In one session, when confronted with crime scene photos, he simply replied, "I saw beauty, don't you see it?" He wasn't joking, nor was he teasing. He seemed sincere, like someone who truly believed it had a purpose, an aesthetic. This raised a new alarm. What if beyond the personality disorder, there was an almost philosophical mindset justifying death? This possibility led experts to even darker territory: functional psychopathy, a type of behavior where the individual not only understands social norms, they utilize, shape, and subvert them. They create plausible, convincing, empathetic discourses. But behind it all, there's only coldness. A strategic use of emotion as a facade, as a mask. And in this case, Daniel's mask was frighteningly effective. He spoke about love as if reciting a clinical manual. He defined pain as a place where clarity is found. He said Marina wasn't a victim, she was a passenger, and that he was merely the driver. This role reversal, this narrative distortion where the killer positions himself as a facilitator, confused even the most experienced professionals. And when asked if he regretted it, the answer was always the same: no, she rested. Some began to believe that, indeed, there was delusion, but not the classic kind, where reality dissolves. It was a functional, selective delusion. He believed in his own version of events, constructed not to escape guilt, but to justify a cruel act as if it were altruism. A feigned empathy, which, in truth, was sadism disguised as compassion. But the most sensitive point came at an unexpected moment, when one of the psychologists asked, "Daniel, if she hadn't asked, would you have done it anyway?" He fell silent. He took a deep breath, and then simply said, "Her pain had already chosen me." No one knew exactly what that meant. But there, in that moment, a new concept took shape. Perhaps Daniel wasn't just trying to shift blame. Perhaps he was trying to immortalize a role as savior in his own mind, in history, and in the collective. Memory. This narrative manipulation is a powerful tool in certain criminal profiles. And in this case, it worked almost like hypnosis, because even those who studied his behavior at some point admitted to doubting their own perception. They no longer knew what was truth, fabrication, or calculated madness. And that's where the real danger lies. When a lie is told with such conviction, it begins to seem more logical than the truth. And deep down, that's what Daniel wanted. Inside the courtroom, his testimony was brief, but emblematic. He didn't cry, he didn't tremble. He simply asked them to read a letter. He wrote neatly, with precise spacing, as if he were editing a memoir. In the letter, he said that Marina was the only person who made him feel something real, that her silence screamed louder than any plea, and that he simply listen. This letter became a staple in criminal psychology courses, because each sentence seemed to have been constructed with a dual purpose: to generate empathy, and to disorient. The reader couldn't tell if they were reading a confession or a work of fiction. And the more they read, the more they felt part of Daniel's mental labyrinth. Exactly the effect he was aiming for. The trial wasn't just legal. It was emotional, social, cultural, even religious for some. And when the sentence was read, the courtroom remained in absolute silence. Daniel's only reaction was a slight nod, as if it had already been written into his internal script. He knew he would die, but he wanted everyone to remember, not the guilt, but the doubt. This doubt planted like a seed, this slow poison, this moral inversion, is what transforms a crime into a disturbing legacy. Because in the end, Daniel didn't just kill a woman. He killed certainty. He subverted what is right and what is wrong. He created a narrative where death seems, at some point, justifiable. And that is the most dangerous part, because there's a recording, a final one, made just hours before the execution. A short audio recording, but one that hides between pauses and breaths, perhaps the only true confession. Something no one expected. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear now isn't about him. It's about what might exist behind the silence of any seemingly ordinary gaze. The courtroom was packed, but it wasn't like in the movies with dramatic screams or overreactions. It was worse. A dense, almost solid silence, as if everyone was breathing for fear of breaking something invisible. In the front row, Marina's parents seemed frozen in time. Her father held a crumpled photo of his daughter when she was just 8 years old. Her mother clutched a necklace engraved with the girl's name. On the other side, sitting with his hands folded and a neutral expression, was Daniel, not a tear, not a glance away, as if he were simply waiting for the end of a play he already knew. But what no one expected was what would come next. The prosecution opened the trial with the obvious evidence: scene records, forensic reports, screenshots of conversations, deleted and resurfaced messages. But the defense presented something different, something that changed the course of the hearing: Marina's personal diary. A notebook with a light blue cover, found months later while cleaning the house. Inside, loose sentences, some incomplete, others unsettling. One, in particular, seemed to scratch the courtroom floor like a blade. "I feel like I'm a mistake. Sometimes I just want to disappear, but I wish someone would see me sooner." The room reacted with restrained shock. It wasn't just sadness. It was doubt, and Daniel capitalized on it. The defense built its narrative on this sentence, and others. It tried to paint Marina not as a helpless victim, but as an emotionally fragile woman seeking a way out, who might have consented, or worse, desired it. A brutal reversal, but strategically placed. It had an immediate impact on public opinion. Outside, the crowd was divided between those shouting for justice and those wanting to understand why. The debates became a war between two truths, one legal, the other emotional. The prosecutor, in a firm voice, said, "No one asks to die tied up, marked in silence. That's not a choice. It's execution." But the defense insisted, what if she didn't want to be saved? What if he just listened to her when no one else was listening? The phrase became a headline. It went viral. It gained hashtags. TV shows discussed it. Psychiatrists tried to contextualize it. Sociologists debated it, and the public was lost. Between compassion and revulsion. Inside the courtroom, tension mounted. The technical evidence made clear the planning, the ritual, The control, but the diary, left room for emotional doubt. And this combination is dangerous, because when the jury's mind is contaminated with ambiguity, the trial ceases to be just a legal process. It becomes a reflection of society. During one of the interrogations, Daniel was blunt. "I only did what she couldn't say out loud." He didn't blink. He didn't tremble. And that was more disturbing than any scream. The judge asked for the sentence to be read with everyone standing. But before that, something unexpected happened. Marina's mother stood up, looked Daniel in the eye, and asked, "Do you still think she'd thank you?" He smiled. He lowered his eyes and replied, "It doesn't matter what I think anymore. She's rested." This was the coldest moment of the trial, because there, even without admitting it, he reasserted his control, his power over the narrative, his power over her image. And that, for the prosecution, was decisive. The sentence came down a few hours later, the death penalty, execution scheduled. But the damage was already done, because the country was divided. In the following days, the discussion raged. Some blamed Marina, some blamed the system. Some saw Daniel as a product of a neglected childhood, and some simply wanted to forget. But forgetting was impossible, because the case was given a name, the Enigma of Consent. A sophisticated-sounding title, but in practice, it was a cruel way of saying, we no longer know who's to blame when pain hides between the lines. And perhaps that's why this trial was so remarkable, because it exposed something much bigger than a crime. It exposed the fragility of all our certainties, how silence can be interpreted, how pain can be distorted, how a diary can become a weapon, and how the absence of screams is sometimes the loudest scream. Some called it narrative manipulation, others retroactive emotional abuse. But the truth is, the impact was real. Families began to rethink their behaviors. Schools began to address issues like self-harm and depression more deeply. Clinics received more requests for help. Because yes, Marina talked about disappearing, but this wasn't an invitation to be killed. It was a silent plea to be understood. Daniel used words as a weapon, but he also used silence, and this combination is destructive, because it infiltrates places where logic cannot reach. And for many, it was like watching a reverse magic trick. You know it's a lie, but you still feel bewitched. And that says much more about the world we live in than about the crime itself. Because there's a detail in this trial that almost everyone missed. A small gesture. An expression on Daniel's face, captured by a camera forgotten in the corner of the room. And perhaps in this gesture lies the missing key. A fragment of truth that escaped between the words. And that could change everything. Sometimes what corrodes most inside ... is what we've never been able to say out loud. A misinterpreted phrase. A cry for help disguised as silence. An old feeling of not being seen. Or worse ... of being seen too late. So if at any point in this story you felt a pain you recognize, even if distant, write the sentence here in the comments. I wanted to disappear too. No need to explain. No need to justify yourself. Just write. As a way to let the weight out through words. Sometimes, that alone is enough for someone to realize they're not alone. If you carry memories that still hurt, or if you know someone who once tried to ask for help without knowing how, this space is yours too. Comments aren't just loose words. They're a place of memory, of shared indignation, of hidden belonging. Every outpouring here helps keep this conversation alive. Helps prevent stories like Marina's from being forgotten or distorted. Because when you write, you also resist silence. Now I want to continue revealing what that forgotten camera captured, and why that might be the detail the courts overlooked. The image wasn't clear, but what it showed was enough to make one of the jurors cry. The first sentence was scribbled, almost illegible. I don't know how to go on anymore. It was on the third page of the diary, written in blue pen, pressed hard enough to tear the paper. It wasn't a farewell note. It was undated, unsigned. But it was there, between a note about medication and another about the relentless loneliness. This was the fragment the prosecution used to construct a narrative of despair. Marina, they said, no longer wanted to live. And perhaps deep down, she was handing over control of her own life to someone who promised her silence and kept his word. But a single sentence doesn't carry the weight of truth. And the truth, in this case, seemed to be in pieces, as if someone had broken up a story and distributed the pieces at different times. A text message sent 2 days before the crime read, "I just want to disappear. Do you understand me?" Another. Minutes later, "I can't stand pretending everything is okay anymore." For the defense attorneys, that was enough. They said it wasn't murder. It was compassion, but her face didn't look peaceful. The marks on her body said otherwise. The words, written in red ink in crooked letters, screamed a pain that wasn't gentle. She was tied up, her wrists behind her back. The scene was set coldly, as if every detail had been rehearsed to look ritualistic, and most disturbing, a small mirror positioned next to her body. It reflected part of her face and part of a wall where a hand-drawn drawing of circular lines hung. That wasn't in the initial forensic report. It was only revealed later by a police officer who saved the image on his cell phone but was afraid to present it. He said it could compromise the case. But compromise why? What was it about that reflection that seemed so dangerous? According to him, a shadow, a silhouette behind the door, which didn't match the defendant's testimony, who claimed to have acted alone. The silhouette appeared to be that of a woman. This detail was never officially confirmed, and that changes everything. Because if someone was watching, if there was a third presence there, then the whole story needs to be retold. The supposed confession, the idea that she asked for it, the final request, all of this may have been molded, contaminated by a game of manipulation deeper than any report could grasp. Forensic psychologists have pointed out a strange pattern. In the accused's speech, he repeated phrases that weren't his. They were hers, taken from the diary, almost as if he were acting out a convenient version. And here comes a question that shatters any certainty. When someone says, "I want to disappear," are they asking for help or permission? And do those who hear this phrase have the right to interpret it however they wish? In the tormentor's twisted logic, Marina wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice to her own death, a weak woman, according to him, who needed to be freed. And he offered himself as a liberator, but empathy is no excuse, and consent is no sacrifice. The revelations that came later exposed the contradictions even further. A letter found in his closet, hidden behind anatomy books, revealed a written plan with specific dates, locations, and phrases he was to say next. Phrases like, "She knew what she wanted," "I just helped," "It was a deal." Everything rehearsed, everything ready before the last meeting even took place. The letter was signed with the initials AM, which didn't correspond to Marina's name. And to this day, no one knows who wrote it, because there's a detail that went unnoticed during the trial. Something small, but it could completely change the course of this story. An email exchange made weeks before the crime that no one has read to this day. The reason? Her email password was only recently discovered, and the content is disturbing. Stay with me until the end. You need to see what she wrote, and to whom. The day of his execution arrived with a calm that was frightening. It was as if time had slowed down just to observe every step, every gesture, every silence. Daniel didn't ask for anything extravagant. His request for his last meal was simple: bread, butter, and coffee, nothing more. A strong black coffee, perhaps intended to warm a body already cold from within. The simplicity of the request contrasted with the complexity of what was to come. In his cell, he remained motionless, almost contemplative, as if reliving a scene he had already memorized, yet still wanting to savor every detail, every sound of his imminent end. As the minutes dragged on, Daniel's eyes focused on nothing, or perhaps on something invisible to those watching. The tension on death row was palpable, but he showed no fear, nor anger, nor sadness, only a strange serenity that frightened those nearby. When the time came, as he was led to the electric chair, something everyone expected, a final request, a final word, a final sigh of regret, didn't happen in the traditional way. The phrase that fell from his lips was the same one that had echoed since day one. She asked to die that way. It was a phrase that felt like a mantra, a final sentence he repeated without variation, cold, almost mechanical, without emotion, without a trace of regret. As if, for him, that act were the only possible conclusion to a story that began long before the violence, long before the arrest. A warning? A riddle? A silent challenge to anyone who tried to understand? Those present at that moment said a shiver ran down everyone's spine. It wasn't just the fear of death, but the feeling that there was something there, beyond simple execution. As if that sentence carried a hidden truth that no one was prepared to face. An emotional closure, yes, but also a provocation that left everyone's mind trapped in a web of doubt and uncertainty. In the silence that followed, the cameras captured Daniel's face for the last time. A fixed, almost lifeless gaze, yet one that held an entire story, a journey no one could summarize in a few words. And in that moment, more than ever, it became clear that the mystery of that sentence wasn't just his. It belonged to all of us. Because questioning what it means to ask to die like that is to challenge our very understanding of pain, guilt, and forgiveness. The execution didn't close the case. On the contrary, it opened a new chapter of unease. Because, even after the final silence, the questions remained. Who really asked? What did she mean? And what impact does this story have on the decisions we make about justice, about empathy, about what is human or monstrous? Because Daniel's last sentence isn't the end of the story. There are reports, documents, and testimonies that have been archived, hidden, perhaps even forgotten. In them, his mindset, the behind-the-scenes nature of the trial, the decisions that shaped the fate of 2 lives, appear with surprising clarity. Revelations that question everything we thought was right and wrong. Stay with me until the end. Because what comes next could change the way you see this story, and maybe even the very idea of justice. The echo of that phrase still resonates, spanning the years like a whisper no one could silence. She has to die that way. Words that carry such profound weight that they have become an enigma, a labyrinth where no one knows for sure where each path leads. Criminologists, psychologists, behavioral experts, and even filmmakers have delved into this mystery, searching for answers that have never fully materialized. Was that phrase a genuine confession? Or merely a final manipulation, a meticulously staged act to maintain control even in the final minutes of life? The doubt persists, and perhaps it is precisely this doubt that has become the darkest legacy of this entire story. Transforming a simple sentence into a complex thesis is what distinguishes great cases from anonymity. This case not only made its way into books and documentaries, but also infiltrated popular culture. It became a film script, university discussions, and even a collective trauma. Because it's not just about what was said, but the impact those words had on the imaginations of thousands of people. They challenged common perceptions of guilt, consent, and responsibility. They questioned the fine line between victim and perpetrator, between truth and fiction. And above all, they questioned our very ability to understand human complexity. What remains is a vacuum of peace. Because the sentence brought no relief to anyone, it didn't seal a cycle. It didn't offer justice or redemption. On the contrary, it fueled an unrest that spans generations. This sentence is a ghost that haunts every mind trying to understand what happened that silent dawn. A nagging reminder that behind simple words, hidden truths, power plays, emotional manipulations, and decisions that change lives forever can lurk. The impact of this enigma extends beyond the courtroom. It touches the core of our collective mindset, forcing us to rethink our decisions about justice and punishment, and inviting us to revisit the behind-the-scenes stories we think we already know. And on this journey of unanswered questions, discomfort mingles with curiosity, creating a spiral where transformation is not easy, but necessary. To this day, experts debate the behind-the-scenes of this final act. Some claim the phrase was a last-ditch attempt to control the narrative, a cold gesture of power. Others believe it was a sincere echo of a troubled mind, caught between remorse and denial. Some see it as an act of courage or, on the contrary, a clear sign of delirium. Each interpretation reveals more about the observer than the speaker. This multiplicity of hidden truths is what keeps the discussion alive, what makes this case something greater than a simple tragedy. In fact, this enigma has become a mirror onto which we project our own doubts, fears, and weaknesses. And perhaps that is its greatest strength, not to solve, but to challenge. To transform what seemed like a final sentence into an invitation to look deeper, to question our beliefs, to face the impact of human decisions on real lives, because there are records, testimonies, and documents that have been forgotten or intentionally left aside. In these hidden layers, there are revelations that can change our understanding of this phrase and all that it means. And it is in this shadowy terrain that the hidden truth begins to emerge, inviting those willing to accompany this journey to rethink everything that has been said, felt, and judged. Stay with me until the end, because what follows is not just an outcome, it is a transformation that touches the essence of what it means to understand the darkest side of humanity. Death row is a place where time seems to dissolve, a space between the present and oblivion, where silence weighs more heavily than any sound. Some prison guards, those who spent years within these cold walls, tell stories that many dismiss as mere legends. They speak of echoes, whispers that cross the cells like shadows, voices that belong to no one but that everyone recognizes. The phrase that has come back to haunt that place is the same one Daniel uttered for the last time. She asked to die. Like that, they say that on silent nights, when the darkness is almost palpable, this whisper runs through the halls. It's not a scream nor a lament. It's a cold repetition, like a mantra that won't let itself fade. As if that man's soul, even after death, remained there, trapped in that phrase, waiting for someone to understand it, or perhaps for someone to challenge it. It's a presence that goes beyond the physical, an invisible mark of a story that never found its end. Anyone who works in this environment knows the weight of this repetition. It's not just a memory, it's a warning, a somber invitation to look beyond what meets the eye, to question the certainties that justice has tried to build. Many remain silent, others are restless, but all carry within them the feeling that that phrase is still alive, pulsing in the heavy air, testing the endurance of those who hear it. And this persistence reveals the true impact of the word, which transcends execution and judgment and takes root in the collective mind. This phrase has become an enigma not only because of its origin, but because of its staying power. It's a constant reminder that even in the end, control can be a powerful weapon. Daniel used this last expression as a seal, a signature he left dangling on the threshold between truth and manipulation. And the scariest thing is to think that it may never be completely deciphered, because its echo is not just audible, it's psychological. It's a presence that challenges the mindset of those who believe that the end means silence. And even for outsiders, this phrase brings about a silent transformation. It questions what we understand by guilt and innocence, by remorse and indifference. It forces us to reflect on decisions made under pressure, the behind-the-scenes workings of a system that often fails to see beyond appearances. The impact of this phrase on the collective imagination isn't just literary or cinematic, it's real, profound, and visceral. Because what few know is that this echo carries with it more than a simple repetition. It is the shadow of a hidden truth, a fragment of a story that continues to unfold behind the scenes, where revelations still await to be brought to light. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover may transform your perspective on justice, memory, and what it truly means to confront the darkest side of human existence. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something deep inside you, that restlessness that won't let us simply turn the page and forget. Perhaps because, deep down, the search for justice isn't just about condemning or acquitting, but about understanding what really happened. And here, amidst the shadows and hidden truths, we connect. If this message touched you, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." I want to know who's by my side on this journey, that doesn't give up easily, that insists on raising questions that many would rather bury. If this video made you feel the weight of these words, the impact of these decisions, and the layers that truth can hide, a like is a simple way to show that this search for what is fair and true matters. That discomfort doesn't drive us apart, but unites us. It's more than a gesture, it's a sign that we're in this together. And there's a video here that complements this topic, bringing even more revelations that broaden this view of what lies behind appearances. Click and stay with me there. Because some stories only make sense when we allow the mystery to reveal itself in layers, and this journey is far from over.